Well, welcome everyone. It's a little bit after 4 and we are live streaming and we are recording. So I'm going to try to get us going. And thank you all for attending who's in the room, and also I'm sure others out there. Vocare week has been very good. We've had some wonderful programs, and I am very thankful for that. I had a wonderful opportunity to speak this morning in chapel, and this is a very different kind of address. I've been working on research on calling now for a while, not only for Vocare, but I'm also working on an introductory textbook in Christian ministry. And so in the second part of that book is the section on calling. And I found myself really intrigued by Luther. Everything seems to come back to Luther. But also it's interesting to me how calling kind of changes not too long after Luther, our views of calling. So I'm going to read a paper, and when I am finished with that, we will look at a couple of slides that kind of take us into discussion mode, and I'm going to open it up to discussion. So let me get started. The Latin Vulgate was the primary translation of the Bible for more than 1,000 years in Europe. So the Latin word vocation became predominant in Western Christianity. Vocation comes from the Latin root vocatio, or call, and the verb vocare means to call. Over the past 2 millennia, the idea of vocation has been defined and redefined according to varying understandings of church and society. For many centuries, the Catholic Church viewed vocation as the call to service in special religious occupations. In the Reformation, the idea of vocation was expanded to include all Christians in service to church and work in the world. In recent times, the idea of vocation has tended to lose its religious associations entirely. To have a vocation now simply means to have a job or a career. These changing views have made understanding calling difficult. In order to gain some clarity, it's helpful at this point to review these historical developments in more depth. In the New Testament, the language of vocation was used in 2 ways: as the call to salvation and as the call to service. In the earliest Christian centuries following the New Testament period, the primary emphasis was on the call to salvation itself. In a Roman world, Christianity was illegal. It was socially offensive and politically dangerous. Simply becoming a Christian was a decision fraught with risk and rejection. In this hostile context, the early Christians view of calling, they viewed it in terms of extreme personal sacrifice. Ignatius of Antioch, around 107 CE, on his way to martyrdom in Rome, described this sentiment. Quote, "It's not that I merely want to be called a Christian, but actually to be one. The greatness of Christianity lies in being hated by the world, not in its being convincing to it. Let me be fodder for wild beasts. That is how I can get to God." With changing circumstances and the legitimization of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the legalization of Christianity in the Roman Empire under Constantine, the ideal of risk and sacrifice shifted from the suffering of societal persecution toward the suffering of self-denial. The self-induced practices of ascetic monasticism came to characterize a higher calling. Athanasius, in his work, The Life of Anthony, described Anthony's practices of living in isolation, sleeping on the ground, frequent fasting, even to the point of starvation, and praying incessantly as being especially valued by Christ. Quote, "And the voice of Christ came to him, 'Anthony, I was here, but I waited to see your fight, because of which, since you have endured, have not been defeated. I will ever be a help to you and will make your name known everywhere.'" The ideal of self-sacrifice among the solitary monks and eventually the communal monastics redefined and limited the view of religious calling. Alongside this narrowing, the gradual rising status of church leaders to a distinct clergy class from that of ordinary members or a laity class contributed to a restricted view of calling. In the earliest years of Christianity, church leaders and church members were distinguished more by functional roles than higher status. The formal distinction between clergy and laity developed only gradually in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, when the status of clergy took on aspects of the Old Testament priesthood and the meaning of the Lord's Supper took on sacramental connotations. In turn, the development of the sacramental Eucharist gave rise to a sacramental status of clergy itself. Bishops, priests, monks, and nuns came to be seen as a higher order of Christians through vocation and ordination. The word ordination comes from the word order. This special order of Christians was understood to be entering a distinctly spiritual or religious life, as opposed to an ordinary or temporal life. The most prominent characteristic of this transition was the commitment to remain unmarried. Celibacy had become a significant defining act of personal sacrifice for those who receive the calling or vocation to enter the religious life as a priest or monk or nun. Hence, to have a vocation meant to be called to a higher and holier life, dedicating oneself, even marrying oneself to God and the church. Vocation as a special calling to religious service prevailed in the Western Church until the Reformation, and it remains a primary emphasis in the Catholic Church today. Since the Second Vatican Council in the early 1960s, the Roman Catholic Church has expanded the idea of vocation to include both clergy and laity. Yet this inclusion has not diverged from the basic view of vocation as relating to various states or levels of holiness. For Roman Catholics today, vocation means calling to either the priesthood, the religious life, monks or nuns, or to marriage. The clerics and the monastics are called to live in a state of celibacy, where the married obviously are not. It is clear, therefore, that for Catholics even today, marital status remains at the heart of distinguishing vocations. The reformers of the 16th century reacted to this view. Martin Luther, in particular, set forth a revolutionary reinterpretation of vocation. Martin Luther, who himself had entered the religious vocation as a celibate Augustinian monk, came to reject this former life. Based on his study of the New Testament, particularly the writings of Paul, Luther came to view salvation as produced solely by God's gracious choice to forgive the sinner. Humans are saved solely by faith in this grace. No human work can justify sinners or make them acceptable and right with God. Based on his new understanding of salvation, Luther developed his theology of the Christian life. Central to that theology is the distinction between the two worlds or realms in which the Christian lives. In the spiritual or the inward realm, a person deals directly and only with God through grace and faith. In the bodily or external realm, a person deals with other people through the law of love. Calling, therefore, means different things in these different realms. In the spiritual realm, a Christian is called to salvation through the preaching of the gospel or the word. In the external realm, a Christian already has an earthly calling. In fact, all humans have a calling ordained by God as part of the created order. The difference for Christians, however, is not in having such callings, but in how they live out their callings. In Luther's view, Christians are free before God, but bound by the law of love toward others. They are bound to love their neighbors through their various earthly callings. Loving others through life callings, however, does not enhance a Christian's spiritual relationship with God. That relationship has been established by grace and faith, and no human external actions can add or detract from it. The result is that Luther maintains there are no holier or higher callings in life. So there is no essential difference between clergy and laity, and there is no special vocation associated with celibacy. Instead, a vocation implying a religious state through which one worked toward individual perfection, vocation for Luther meant the calling of all Christians to salvation and the resulting desire and power to love their neighbors in all areas of life. These areas included three primary orders of creation: the church, the household, and the state. The church order included all religious roles and responsibilities, not just the priesthood. The household order included marriage and the whole societal arena of labor and production. The political order included all civic responsibilities within the state. Luther's revolutionary view opened vocation to all believers in whatever circumstances of life. All could now see their life and work as places or ways where they could fulfill the calling of God to love their neighbor. Luther was simply affirming what he believed Paul taught in 1 Corinthians, that the call to salvation from God comes to people who are embedded in social roles and tasks. The call does not necessarily change those roles themselves, but changes the way of seeing and living out those roles. To quote 1 Corinthians 7:17-24, "However that may be, let each of you lead the life that the Lord has assigned," and underlying the NRSV word assigned is also the word call in the Greek. The life that the Lord has called, to which God called you. "This is my rule in all the churches. Let each of you remain in the condition," the calling, which is underlying the word condition, "in which you were called. Were you a slave when called? Do not be concerned about it. Even if you gain your freedom, make use of your present condition, now more than ever. In whatever condition," calling, "you were called, brothers and sisters, there remain with God." Throughout 1 Corinthians, Paul deals with the implications of the freedom now available to these new Christians. Paul's law-free gospel created a plethora of moral dilemmas for the Corinthians. So he asserted an ethical principle that maintained Christian freedom while also bringing moral restraint to this rather licentious people. To deal with the question of lawsuits, sexual morality, food restrictions, circumcision, marriage, celibacy, etc., Paul gives guidance for living out the freedom of the Christian now, the freedom the Corinthians now had in Christ. Such freedom was to be used for the benefit of others, not for self-indulgence. Paul repeatedly states this moral principle. He says, "All things are lawful for me, but not all things are beneficial. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything." That's 1 Corinthians 6:12. Then he writes, "All things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. Do not seek your own advantage, but that of the other." That's 1 Corinthians 10:23-24. Luther's own interpretation of Paul's thought here spelled out the implications of being freed toward God, but bound by the love and benefit of neighbor. Luther wrote, "Therefore, notice this and differentiate between the freedom existing in your relation to God and the freedom existing in your relation to your neighbor. In the former, freedom is present. In the latter, it is not." Luther's view of vocation, therefore, related to Paul's ethical principle of the responsible use of freedom. Vocation as a way of living in the kingdom of God while also inhabiting the kingdom of the world was a way of living in the kingdom of God while also inhabiting the kingdom of the world. Christians were called to live only by grace in the heavenly realm and live only by the law of love in the earthly realm. For Luther, the human or earthly realm includes life in church and society. So his view of the church was broad and inclusive. The church was not wholly distinct from the state. So the church includes the saved, but also in some way incorporates the lost. The wheat and the weeds grow up together until the harvest. Vocation, therefore, is the call to live out salvation in all human relations. For this reason, Luther also included service to the state as a calling, including the service of soldiers in war. Now, similar to Luther's view, but with some key differences, is the view of vocation by John Calvin. John Calvin's view of calling begins, as Luther's, with God's gracious call to salvation. Through the preaching of the gospel, God's general call goes out to all people to believe. Human sin or human depravity, however, has made everyone incapable of responding to this general call. Only those who are specially chosen or the elect are given the faith to receive salvation. Calvin thus saw God's salvific call going out to all, but effective only among those specially chosen by God. To quote Calvin, "The statement of Christ, 'Many are called, but few are chosen,' is in this manner very badly understood. Nothing will be ambiguous if we hold fast to what ought to be clear from the foregoing, that there are two kinds of call. There's the general call by which God invites all equally to himself through the outward preaching of the word. The other kind of call is special, which he deigns for the most part to give to the believers alone." Now, by the way, in that quote from Calvin, I don't know what he means by "for the most part." Sounds strange to me. Is he opening a window there some way? Vocation, therefore, becomes operational only among the elect. The problem that arose for both Luther and Calvin, as it had been for Paul himself in Romans, was how to explain why moral obedience was necessary for the Christian. If human obedience has nothing to do with increasing God's favor toward a person, then there appeared to be no reason for the performance of good works at all. Luther dealt with this issue through his sharp distinction between the two realms of grace and law. Humans are free from law in the heavenly realm, but bound by law, the command to love one's neighbor in the heavenly realm. Calvin, like Luther, maintained the distinction between the two realms or kingdoms, but he did not view these realms as entirely separate. These realms are connected or mediated through the human conscience. Both are realms of government or instruction for Christian behavior. The spiritual realm is that of the worship and reverence of God, and the political realm is that, or the temporal realm, either way, is that of human duties and citizenship. Between these two realms lies the human conscience that serves, quote, as a sort of guardian appointed for man, that enables integrity of heart before God and proper conduct among others. The result of Calvin's view is that there is less of a distinction between the realm of grace and the realm of law or works as there are in Luther. For Calvin, there is no realm in which God's grace is not the effective cause of salvation and subsequent obedient living. For Calvin, grace and law, gospel and obedience go hand in hand. Alasdair McGrath notes that the radical antithesis between law and gospel, so characteristic of Luther and Marcion before him, is quite lacking for Calvin. Law and gospel are continuous with each other and do not stand in diametrical opposition. Calvin maintained that grace enabled obedience to the law, which meant that good works could be an indicator that a person was truly among the elect. According to McGrath, good works for Calvin were outward and visible signs of the presence of God's grace within the believer. To quote McGrath, grace, in other words, is only given to the elect. This being the case, an obvious question arises: how can anyone know whether he or she is among the elect? Although Calvin stressed that works are not the grounds of salvation, he nevertheless allowed it to be understood that they are the grounds of assurance. For Christians in Calvin's world, it became incumbent to demonstrate their election by the quality of their work. This emphasis upon work, in turn, shifted the focus of vocation from Luther's emphasis upon love in earthly roles and relationship to diligent and productive work for the glory of God. The distinction between Luther's and Calvin's views are subtle but significant. In Luther's view, all humans, as a part of the created order, have a calling, but Christians fulfill these callings with a renewed heart of love for others. Luther's focus is on the love of neighbor, not the quality of the work itself. Calvin, on the other hand, emphasizes quality performance of the work in order to please God. Callings for Calvin, therefore, are primarily conduits for piety or worship rather than only ways to serve others, as they are in Luther. Luther and Calvin have different emphases, but at the end of the day, both are in essential agreement that all people have a calling. Now, the radical wing of the Reformation sees things differently. The radical wing of the Reformation refers to a collection of free church groups that rejected the state church Protestantism of the magisterial reformers, Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli. These groups agreed in rejecting the authority of the state in matters of religion, but they varied according to their views of religious authority. Like Luther and Calvin, the Anabaptists found their authority solely in the Bible, but they disagreed on what they found there. They agreed with the basic insight that salvation is strictly by grace and faith. They also agreed that with the theology of the two kingdoms. The Anabaptists disagreed, however, on how Christians enter the heavenly realm and live in the earthly realm. The Anabaptists maintained that true Christians become citizens of only one of the two kingdoms. They viewed vocation as a radical call to discipleship and life in the community of Christ. The Schleidheim Confession of Faith is among the earliest statements of faith among Anabaptist groups. And in that, it advocates, in the confession, it advocated the baptism of believers only. It strongly opposed infant baptism, called for separation from unbelievers, prohibited service as a government official, and participation in war. Now, I'm going to read about three articles from the Schleidheim Confession, and then one quote from another Anabaptist. So these are articles from the Schleidheim Confession. Baptism shall be given to all those who have learned repentance and amendment of life, and those who believe truly in their sins, that their sins are taken away by Christ, and to all those who walk in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and wish to be buried with him in death, so that they may be resurrected with him. This excludes all infant baptism, the highest and chief abomination of the Pope. A separation, next article, a separation shall be made from the evil and from the wickedness which the devil planted in the world. In this manner, simply that we shall not have fellowship with them, the wicked, and not run with them in the multitude of their abominations. For truly all creatures are in but two classes, good and bad, believing and unbelieving, darkness and light, the world and those who have come out of the world, God's temple and idols, Christ and Belial, and none can have a part with the other. Whew. Mike, what'd you say about brimstone? Here it is. Okay. It is not appropriate, next article, it is not appropriate for a Christian to serve as a magistrate because of these points. The government magistracy is according to the flesh, but the Christians is according to the Spirit. Their citizenship is in this world, but the Christian citizenship is in heaven. The worldlings are armed with steel and iron, but the Christians are armed with the armor of God, with truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, and the Word of God. And now a quote from Ulrich Stadler, who is among the Hutterite, or the South German version of the Anabaptists. There is one communion, and all the faithful in Christ, and one community of the holy children of God, but it must move about in the world, poor, miserable, small, and rejected of the world, of whom, however, the world is not worthy. Thus, in this community, everything must proceed equally. All things must be one and communal, all alike in bodily gifts of their Father in heaven, which he daily gives to be used by his own according to his will. It belongs to all children of God to live, to serve, to work, to seek not their own benefit, but that of another, since we are all of the Lord. Such is their behavior on their pilgrimage. As we can see from these quotations, the Anabaptists view gifts as directly connected with salvation and life in the church. Callings, therefore, cannot be found outside the church. Some Anabaptists, however, were more open to the world outside the churches, like the Swiss Anabaptist Balthasar Hubmaier, who said such faith cannot remain passive, but must break out to God in thanksgiving and to mankind in all kinds of works of brotherly love. Those works alone are good, which God commanded us, and those alone are evil, which he has forbidden. It's a very interesting quote. As a whole, however, the Anabaptists were not inclined to speak of vocation as calling to human society outside the church. The similarities and the differences displayed by the Reformers, magisterial and radical, changed the course of thinking about vocation from that of exclusive religious occupations to the inclusive calling of all Christians to salvation and service. Although their views led to profound changes in the church and society, the depth of their thinking about callings has tended to be forgotten. And the meaning of vocation has since atrophied to that of mere occupations or jobs without much of any religious import. For this reason, in the modern world, there has been a de facto return. There's been a de facto return to viewing the call to Christian leadership as the only kind of real calling. One disastrous result of this exclusive view of calling is that Christian pastors and church staff members have taken on the work of ministry on behalf of their church members. An even more harmful result is that church members have little sense of their own calling in the church or in society. Therefore, a recovery of the insights of the Reformers' views on calling helps Christian leaders understand their work and church members find their meaning and purpose in the world. Now, I want to give you a summary here of comparisons so that we can talk about this. Luther, Calvin, and the Anabaptists. So on the call to salvation, Luther emphasizes grace and faith, and Calvin grace and faith. Now, both of these guys believe in pedobaptism, in infant baptism. So what they're saying is that in the salvation process through grace, faith is being imparted even though it's not conscious. Luther talks about it in mysterious ways. Calvin actually uses the word seed, the seed of faith as being implanted. The Anabaptists, in contrast, talk about grace and conscious faith. They don't think faith is anything unless it's a conscious act. So a baby cannot do that. The second comparison is the two realms. Now, all of these have given lip service to two realms. For Luther, as best I read him, Luther wants to insist on a distinction between a divine realm, an inward realm where we transact with God inwardly, and then a human realm where we live it out of the love of neighbor. Calvin, on the other hand, does not make this a divine-human split. It's more a split between temporal and spiritual. And God is working in both of these. God is not walled off, and our callings are empowered by our salvation and even can reflect our salvation. Now, the two realms for Anabaptists are obviously church and world. So the church is essentially the kingdom of God on earth, and the rest of the world is, world evil and devilish and going to hell. The essence of callings. Well, for Luther, it's relationships and the roles that come out of that. He can talk about fatherhood as a calling, and marriage as a calling, and all of these things are callings, but the emphasis is on how they relate us to others. Now, for Calvin, it's duties and tasks. And Calvin sees this in pretty mundane. I mean, you've got these duties, you've got these tasks, they've been assigned by God, and yet, if you do them right, you can glorify God. And then the Anabaptists, well, they're sticking very close to 1 Corinthians and Romans when they think in terms of spiritual gifts, essentially as whatever we mean by callings, and those are only for the church. The locus of callings, for Luther, it's the external human realm. For Calvin, it's both spiritual and temporal. And again, for the Anabaptists, it's only the church. The function of callings, for Luther, it's to love others. Calvin, it's pretty clear to please God. Now, Calvin's not saying that we don't love others and we don't serve, but the primary emphasis is on pleasing God or glorifying God. And for Anabaptists, it's the benefit to the church. It's the benefit to my brothers and sisters in the church. That's what callings are all about, to help build up the church. And then finally, the state and callings. The state and callings. Well, for Luther, all roles and duties can be legitimate callings. For Calvin, all roles and all duties. For the Anabaptists, no roles, no duties to the state as well. Now, let me clarify here just one thing that some of you may be thinking. I'm not talking about Baptists when I talk about Anabaptists. We're talking about almost a century earlier, and the Anabaptists are really the precursors of, like, the Amish, the Mennonites, and so Baptists are all over the place on this, okay? We've got parts of all of this, so if you're wondering that. Now, I want to just look at a couple of takeaways, and then I just want us to talk about this. So, some positives. I think one of the great positives here is Luther's emphasis on relationship and love of neighbor. I just think that's, I just love that. I think this is absolutely positive. But I also think that Calvin's emphasis on pleasing God is certainly legitimate. It's not a work, and Calvin wouldn't say that either, but I think all of us have a sense that we are in some way pleasing God, without believing in earning salvation. We're just doing what God wants. Third, I like the Anabaptist emphasis on community. They had a very strong sense that when we are called into Christ, we're called into community. Now they see it in a very restricted sense, but it's inherently communal that we live out the gifts. And that's also a little bit of an echo of Luther without the worldly part. Now, some concerns. One of the concerns that I have and that all of us have, I think, who try to deal with calling is the changing views of calling relative to changes in church and society. This is a moving target. It's been a moving target since the first century. What is a calling and how does it operate, and does it change? Seems to change the way we view church, the way we view society. I don't know that we can ever get around that. But I do think we're in a wonderful time now of kind of looking back, and we can begin to assess and maybe collect some of the best and most legitimate ways of thinking about it. It certainly is an embryo in the New Testament and in the first few centuries, but it's not nearly as developed as it gets by the time of the Catholic Church, and then certainly in Luther and Calvin. A second concern is the relationship of discipleship to callings in society. When I was growing up and learning this language, we didn't talk a lot about calling. We talked about discipleship. You were saved, and then you were being saved, and the being saved was appropriating and following Jesus in whatever area of life. So I find it interesting when I'm trying to kind of tease out in my own mind, what's the difference between discipleship and calling? I'm not sure that there is much of a line between that, but it's an interesting issue. Third, the exercise of personal freedom and obligation to others. Luther was really trying to exposit Paul in 1 Corinthians. As a matter of fact, 1 Corinthians 7 is ground zero. 1 Corinthians 7 was the text that told the priests and the nuns that not touching a woman was better than touching a woman, okay? They interpreted 1 Corinthians 7 in terms of celibacy. This was the place where Luther focused so much attention because he's throwing that off. And it's this calling language that emerges out of this question of should you leave your spouse if you've become a Christian? Is it better not to ever get married? These are all there in 1 Corinthians 7. But Paul elicits this idea that all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. So how do you live that out? This is difficult. This is the most difficult area for all Christian faith. What does it mean to just love your neighbor? Does this permit things that a lot of us have been reticent to? These are very interesting questions. And number 4 is something I don't hear these guys dealing with, but we've had 400 years, 500 years of theology, 400 years, where they don't seem to be very much aware of institutional evil. The Anabaptists are. But what is institutional evil? That's when you get a bad outcome from a God-ordained calling where good people are involved. Good people in a good calling, and yet you get a bad outcome. So this is structural or institutional evil. And Luther will say, hey, it's fine to be a soldier and slay and kill and maim as long as you're doing it out of love for your society, for your fatherland, for God. Now, if you're doing it because you just want to hurt people, then it's bad. That's a huge gap for me to drive a truck through. How do we, now I'm not saying that, I'm not suddenly trying to be a pacifist here, but what I am saying is there doesn't seem to be an awareness that when you make everything God ordained, every office, every role, every work in society, how are we to understand that sometimes those get corrupted and even good people get caught up in it, good intentions. So I think this is something that I'm not going to solve here. All right, so I'm going to stop and say, let's talk about any questions that you have. Observations. Yeah, go ahead. Right. Well, now, the first answer to that is I'm not a church historian, so that's getting a little bit beyond my ability to tease that. But my general opinion would be I can't imagine Calvin's theology without Luther. I mean, I think, Luther's the one who, now, the difference to me is Luther was an Augustinian monk, and he had a vested interest in the change of the idea of vocation. Calvin was an attorney, a lawyer, and this is, I don't think this was as close to his soul as it was to Luther. So I think I hear Calvin wanting to maintain a kind of sovereignty principle, that God is sovereign in all areas of life. And he's more concerned with the pleasing of God than he is with this loving of neighbor. But Luther is got a kind of a whole different motivation. So I would say that yes, Calvin's in debt to Luther, but they're obviously moving apart. I think Calvin does take it in the direction of work. The big question that was causing my interest is, how did we get from Luther's emphasis on relationship and love to vocation as job, as a work, as a job? Where does that happen? And I think it's coming through Calvin. Yeah. 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 Well, it is an interest. You're putting your finger on the real question here. And when you read a lot of Luther, I haven't read a lot, but I've read enough, I think, and interpreters of Luther, Luther doesn't want to get within a 10-foot pole's length of works. He does not want to suggest that our life in the world adds anything to our relationship with God. In other words, interpreters will say, in salvation, God serves us so that we serve the world. It's not backwards. We don't do anything that serves God through our actions. God serves us, serve the world. I don't hear Calvin thinking that way. I hear Calvin saying, well, God saves us by grace so that we can serve God and others. But for Luther, it goes one way. It's God serving us, and he's choosing us, he's electing us. Now, Calvin and Luther are absolutely in agreement on election. But Luther, I think, is much more consistent on election. If we are really chosen, then there's absolutely nothing. God is doing it all. God's doing it all. Yeah. Yeah, it's God working through us to love our neighbor, but we can't use that to make any claim of praise to God. I mean, now Calvin wants to do that, and that's why I think when Calvin moves that direction, works become the issue. I actually can show something by doing good work. The work shows that I'm elect. Luther's not thinking that way. Luther's not trying to prove election. He doesn't care. The wheat grows up with the tares. Love God, sin boldly. He's not trying to identify the elect. Calvin is. It's a different emphasis. And so the works identify you as the elect. For Calvin, it's just, no, go out and love people. I'm probably much broader strokes, and I think these are great questions. I think it would take much more of a Luther scholar than I certainly am. But this is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Going once. We don't, I know it's late in the day and we're all tired and we don't have to keep doing this. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. You are free to go love your neighbor.